Okay, guys, make sure you have your note sheets with you. What we're taking a look at today is the Spanish-American War, otherwise known as the Splendid Little War, and that it only lasted 3 months. By the end of this lecture, what we want you to be able to answer is, what are the causes and the effects of the Spanish-American War? So as we've talked about the origins of imperialism, what we need to know about the Spanish-American War, how it began, is that by the late 19th century, European colonial activity in the Americas was coming to a close. Spain had been declining in power since the 17th century, and while the United States was growing since the end of the Civil War. What we know is that the Monroe Doctrine was issued in 1823, which it had little weight for the first 75 years until the defeat of Spain in 1898 at the end of this conflict. What happened early on is that by 1898 there was a rebellion that had come to a culminating point where the Cuban rebels had been fighting for their independence from their Spanish conquerors for about 3 years in an attempt to win independence. This rebellion had gone on for quite some time. Guerrilla warfare was used against the Spanish people, so much so that civilians outside of the rebels were placed in reconcentration classes that were separate from concentration camps, I should say, separate from the rebels. The main reason we were interested in Cuba was not only because of our economic interests, that we felt our businesses were concerned about the effects of the revolt upon our commercial possibilities, but many Americans actually compared the struggle that the Cubans were going through against Spain to our own situation that we experienced during the American Revolution. So in a famous political cartoon that we see here of the pan representing Spanish misrule and the woman representing Cuba, beneath it obviously the fire of anarchy brewing, what it really represented was the difficulties that Spain was having to quell the rebellion on behalf of the Cubans. It got so bad to the point where the entire island was under martial law, and that Cubans were actually lynched if they were suspected of any activities that were anti-Spain. So by 1898, many American businesses were concerned about how the revolt could affect them. So our interests there specifically were on some of the resources that you see here: sugar, tobacco, development of railroad supplies, timber. As things got worse as we entered 1898, American military brought in the USS Maine, a battleship that was docked in Havana Harbor, as a symbol of American interest in Cuba, mainly to get out any Americans if the situation became significantly worse. Unfortunately, on the evening of February 15th, 1898, the battleship Maine was destroyed by a mysterious explosion and sank. In the process, 268 sailors were killed, and what it led to was an extreme pride known as jingoism and a move towards war. And what really did a number in terms of public opinion, turning public opinion towards the war, is something that we've talked about in yellow journalism. We'll go back to this in a moment. But as we've talked about in the past, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer were newspapermen who vied for readership, and what they used yellow journalism for, otherwise known as sensational reporting, where writers exaggerated or made up things to attract readers. They did whatever they potentially could to draw readership towards them. So in this case, they would come up with sensational titles that would demonize Spain. They would come up with Spain articles or political cartoons that would really try to put not only them on top of the readership in terms of selling newspapers, but also gain support for the war. So as we see in this political cartoon right here, Spain is represented by this gorilla-like figure who's got a bloody knife in his left hand and a hand on a gravestone that says "Maine sailors murdered by Spain," with a dead American soldier behind it. So a very powerful visual effect that these types of newspapers would use. The name yellow journalism came from a cartoon character that we see here, a mischievous cartoon character known as the Yellow Kid. This character appeared in both of the newspapers, and eventually, like I said, the name yellow journalism kind of derived from it. Initially, what was known as the Teller Amendment pledged that the United States would become involved in the conflict between Spain and Cuba, but would not annex Cuba in case of a victory. So businesses supported an open door policy that favored the United States' involvement in Cuban revolt, mainly because they directly benefited from the conflict in the form of resources and an open market. As we can see here in these cartoons, this is these newspapers. This is an extension of yellow journalism, as you see some of the titles that came to be in both of these newspapers. Eventually, this was not a very lengthy war. We're actually going to go back to this one. But it was known as the Splendid Little War, in that it was only lasted 3 months. But it was also, I guess we can say, a popular war, in that the press celebrated future President Theodore Roosevelt and his gang of who would be known as Rough Riders. So we can see Roosevelt standing here in the middle, who was a very famous individual, glorified as a national hero for leading the Rough Riders, which was a volunteer cavalry unit up San Juan Hill, which is towards the end of the war, and eventually propelling him to national notoriety and obviously the presidency. So the war did not last very long, but what it would do is that eventually we would not annex Cuba, but a Cuban constitution was told that the United States Army would not leave Cuba until what was the Platt Amendment was passed. The Platt Amendment was something that was incorporated into the new Cuban Constitution, and it pledged that the United States would not annex Cuba, but it was supported by anti-imperialists and businessmen who supported the open door policy. And the open door policy essentially states that it is open to American businesses. Cuba eventually would reject the Platt Amendment, but the United States pressured the government to agree, or else they would not allow them to set up their own government. Essentially, it gave the United States the right to intervene for the preservation of Cuban independence, maintain a government adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty. As the war came to a conclusion in December of 1898 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, it was a peace treaty that was signed between the United States and Spain that officially turned over some territory to the United States. The territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, which were once lands of Spain, in addition to Cuba, were given to the United States for a payment of $20 million. And though we've already talked about it, as a result of the Spanish-American War, this is when the Hawaiian Islands were officially annexed as a military base that would be utilized as almost a refueling or a resupplying station that will allow us to get to our new territories of of Guam and the Philippines. And obviously, this was not in the support of the Hawaiians, but what do they think about annexation? Well, in direct context here, so the United States has remained in the Hawaiian Islands and Hawaiian Kingdom since it has been under prolonged occupation to the present, but its continuity as an independent state remains intact under international law. While this is it for the Spanish-American War, as you'll be taking a look at this in greater detail in your groups, what we'll be picking up with next time is what we see here, the Philippines. There was a significant heated argument in the United States about whether or not to further annex the Philippines, but that is what we'll pick up with next time.